Part 72. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 711. Of course Lin Yu knew at this time that this was just Tugu Yanru deliberately trying to anger him. When Lin Yu heard what Tugu Yanru said, a hint of indifference flashed through his affectionate expression, and the blood-colored murderous aura quietly condensed at this moment. Tugu Yanru, who was filled with blood-colored murderous aura, couldn't help but move forward one after another, and only after taking several steps back did he manage to stabilize his figure. Tugu Yanru was forced to retreat twice with Lin Yu on his back, so the look on his face at this time was naturally not too good looking. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body, and a murderous aura began just like this. It spread quietly. "It's interesting, it's really interesting. I didn't expect that you kid, who is quite capable, was able to force me to retreat twice in succession. His aura is quite good, but other things are probably not good enough. A little bit." At this time, Tugu Yanru was talking unhurriedly, with a bit of indifference in his expression. A monstrous momentum gradually began to be released from Tugu Yanru's body, and then he heard a low roar from Tugu Yanru's mouth. "The blood spirit beast is full of blood." After Tugu Yanru finished speaking, he immediately saw that the figure of the strange beast in front of him suddenly began to grow without limit. Then, the surrounding auras began to gather bit by bit towards one place in an instant. But with just one breath, the blood energy surged in front of everyone in an instant. The blood force forced all the people to take several steps back at the same time before they managed to stabilize their bodies. In just a blink of an eye, the blood spirit beast forced everyone to retreat rapidly towards the back. In just an instant, the surroundings were completely enveloped by a murderous intent. After that murderous intent enveloped everyone's hearts, everyone's minds began to tremble slightly. Those people moved forward one after another, and after taking a few steps back, they managed to stabilize their bodies. At this time, Tugu Yanru took a deep breath, and then calmed himself down slightly, his blood boiling due to summoning the snow spirit beast. Suyuyan, Yelengshuang, Long Ling and the man with glasses, after the four of them saw the blood spirit beast, their faces instantly turned a little pale. After several of them took a few crazy steps back at the same time, they managed to stabilize their bodies. Lin Yu stood in front of them alone, then turned around and glanced up and down in their direction. At this moment, Lin Yu was heard speaking coldly. "Please remember to be careful. I may not be able to deal with this guy. His strength is quite impressive," Lin Yu said in a deep voice. Suyuyan, Yelengshuang, Long Ling and the man with glasses, all four of them nodded at the same time after hearing what Lin Yu said. "Don't worry, the few of us can take care of ourselves. You can face the battle with peace of mind. Just change," Amelia Su said softly. Finally, Lin Yu just nodded heavily, slowly raised his head, and then released the aura from his body without reservation. At this time, the space-time beast suddenly appeared in front of Lin Yu. When the time and space beast appeared, this space began to twist and turn little by little. At the end of the space, it slowly seemed as if it was about to be crushed together. Lin Yu gently touched his chin, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "It's interesting, it's really interesting, it's great to be like this." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward, and then he began to merge his aura into one place crazily. In the end, the surrounding space was filled with the aura of the space-time beast, and that space was completely controlled by the space-time beast. At this time, the space-time beast controlled this space and began to transform bit by bit, and then crushed the blood spirit beast into a ball of blood. But after seeing the scene in the distance, Tugu Yanru just rubbed his chin so gently, and the faint smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. Lin Yu half closed his eyes, and then he pondered for a moment. "Interesting, really interesting. Even though that guy has exploded into a ball of blood mist, I can still feel the aura of that little guy. Could it be that his soul is immortal? In this case, it's really surprising. Lin Yu gently touched his chin. After a moment, he saw the monster scene in the distance, and it immediately wrapped around Lin Yu like crazy. That monstrous energy just like this completely enveloped Lin Yu, preparing to tear Lin Yu into pieces by force. Lin Yu looked at the mass of blood surrounding him, and then his expression couldn't help but become slightly ugly. At this time, Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. No, there is something wrong with this matter. The blood energy is a bit too thick. What's more, under the attack of the space-time beast, the blood spirit beast should never have the energy to break free from the space barrier of the space-time beast. Right. After Lin Yu thought of this, he suddenly opened his eyes, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. I understand, I understand. The smile on Lin Yu's face began to become more and more obvious, and then he took a deep breath. I didn't expect that you actually have two blood spirit beasts. This is really something I didn't expect. Lin Yu just said this in a deep voice, and then the others slowly raised their heads and glanced coldly at the guy. Dugu Yanru's expression tightened, and the smile on his face became even more obvious at the end. Ha ha ha, you are indeed worthy of defeating so many masters in my section. It's not easy to actually be able to see the clues. At this moment, Lin Yu just took one step forward, and then charged straight towards Dugu Yanru in such a still manner. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 712. At this time, in the surrounding space, Lin Yu's killing intent made everyone's hearts tremble slightly. Although you have control over me now, are you still so naive that you think you can really do anything to defeat me? Lin Yu's voice was a little cold, and his expression was a little indifferent. Originally, Dugu Yanru thought that he must have defeated Lin Yu this time, but he never expected that Lin Yu seemed to have a backup plan. After Dugu Yanru heard what Lin Yu said, his whole expression couldn't help but look slightly ugly. In just a moment, that overwhelming energy was released from Lin Yu's body so dutifully. Then immediately behind Dugu Yanru, a flame suddenly appeared, and the flame wrapped around Dugu Yanru like this crazily. Dugu Yanru never expected that such a flame could surprise him behind him. At this time, he looked shocked and wanted to run away instantly. But at first, Dugu Yanru didn't notice that the space around him actually became a closed state. The Kylin holy fire was burning brightly in that space. Dugu Yanru's face was slightly ugly. Although he knew that Lin Yu was not an ordinary person and might be difficult to deal with, he never expected that Lin Yu would be so difficult to deal with. After Suyuyan and Ye Lengshuang saw this scene, they just felt a burst of sadness for Dugu Yanru. At this time, Suyuyan and Ye Lengshuang's two daughters, their expressions flashed a bit of indifference, and then their expressions couldn't help but become slightly condensed. No, something seems wrong. After seeing this scene, the expressions on the faces of Suyuyan and Ye Lengshuang began to look slightly ugly. They just felt that this matter seemed a little too simple, so simple that it was unbelievable. Extent. And this Dugu Yanru is the most capable general under the Dark Throne and is honored as one of the 4 killing weapons. It is absolutely impossible for him to make such a low-level mistake. Suyuyan and Ye Lengshuang looked at each other after thinking of this, and then frowned slightly. No, there must be something fishy about this matter. The two of them just talked in a deep voice. At this moment, Dugu Yanru only half closed his eyes. After a moment, he just snapped his fingers and then disappeared directly into that space. When Lin Yu saw Dugu Yanru suddenly disappearing into the cage of time and space, his expression couldn't help but become a little ugly. In the next second, countless blood-congealed arrows stabbed at Lin Yu's body like this crazily. The thousands of arrows and feathers were fired in unison, forcing Lin Yu to move backward one after another. After retreating for a long time, he could barely stabilize his body. At this time, Lin Yu took a deep breath and slowly calmed down his mood. But when Lin Yu wanted to use his combined killing skills to attack Tugu Yanru again, he found that Tugu Yanru had suddenly disappeared. At this moment, the man in black robe came to a cave. The cave was extremely dark, as if it went straight into the ground, without any light, as if it could swallow all things. After the man in black robe saw this scene, his face became slightly ugly. At this moment, the man in black robe just swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and his face became a little pale. What is going on in this ghost place? When the man in black robe thought of this, he couldn't help but feel a little panic in his heart. But after waiting for this moment, the man in black robe still took a deep breath. The man in black robe calmed down his mood slightly. No, we can't just let this matter go. We must think of a way. We must think of a way. The man in black robe was pacing back and forth like this. After thinking for a long time, he didn't know where he should go next. You must know that Tugu Yanru gave himself an order, saying that he would delay Lin Yu, and that he must get the God King herb before Lin Yu arrived here. You must know that the God King herb here grows on the cliff, and it is said that it is protected by the Titan Python. Once an outsider tries to use the God King herb, the Titan Python will never show any tolerance. The man in black robes paced back and forth in front of the cave repeatedly. After thinking for a long time, he took a deep breath. He just calmed down his mood slightly. God King herb, since it is protected by the Titan Python, if I go now, it is tantamount to courting death. But then again, even if I die, I may not be able to get this God King herb. Lord Tugu probably won't be able to get it, just let me seek death. After thinking about this, the man in black robe was really confused for a moment as to why Tugu Yanru sent him here to get the God King herb. Dark Throne and Tugu Yanru seemed to have always used themselves as cannon fodder. When the man in black robe thought of this, a bit of murderous intent flashed in his eyes. And at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared beside the man in black robe, and that person slowly walked towards the man in black robe. When the man in black robe heard the footsteps, he suddenly turned his head and saw a man staring directly at him. After the man in black robe saw the man behind him, his face couldn't help but turn slightly pale. "Sir, why is it you?" Tugu Yanru slowly walked towards the man in black robe step by step, and the man in black robe just kept taking a few steps back. "Here, I just got here, and I was about to go in to get the God King herb." Tugu Yanru just snorted coldly, and then waved his hand casually, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. "Others don't understand you. Do you think I don't understand you? How can you be willing to get the God King herb now? I sent you here in advance just to let you guard the God King cave. Then not to mention you, Titanoboa, even I may not be his opponent." Tugu Yanru just said this coldly, but his expression was quite complicated at this moment. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 713. At this time, after Tugu Yanru disappeared, Lin Yu just felt that Tugu Yanru came for no reason, as if he just wanted to meet him. Lin Yu gently touched his chin, and then couldn't help but shake his head slightly. It's strange. It's really strange. What's the purpose of this guy coming here this time? Could it be just to stop me? But this. At this time, when Lin Yu thought of this, for some reason, an ominous premonition suddenly emerged in his heart. At this time, he half closed his eyes, and then gently rubbed his own breasts. Jaw. After a moment, Lin Yu's face suddenly became shocked, and then he couldn't help but clenched his fists. Damn it, that guy probably did it on purpose. He just wanted to hold me back. What a bastard. Lin Yu just clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, with a gloomy look on his face. After seeing Lin Yu like this, Suyuyan and Yelengshuang slowly walked towards Lin Yu, turned their heads and looked at Lin Yu up and down. What's wrong? Why do you feel uneasy? Did something happen? Suyuyan and Yelengshuang, these two little girls, understood Lin Yu's thoughts at this time. Lin Yu looked at the two of them up and down, and then nodded gently. Yes, we did encounter some trouble. What happened? Tell me, how about it? Suyuyan stared straight at Lin Yu, and then she spoke softly. Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. One of the most troublesome things is probably that the guy just stopped us, and I'm afraid we won't even get there in a while. Over there, the God King's medicinal herbs have probably been taken away by others. Suyuyan and Yelengshuang were there. After hearing what Lin Yu said, their faces were full of disbelief. Their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and their brows could not help but be slightly raised. A wrinkle. What? How is this possible? I'm afraid this is a little impossible. The voices of Suyuyan and Yelengshuang were even slightly hoarse, and their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. Lin Yu slowly walked forward. Nothing is impossible. The guy who just came here just wanted to hold us back. Now I have to admit that he did it. Lin Yu clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and the murderous aura in his body slowly emerged. After seeing this scene, Long Linger on the side ran directly to Lin Yu's side, and her big watery eyes stared straight at Lin Yu. It's better to go there and have a look now. If it's too late, it will be a great thing for us. At this time, Long Linger was speaking so softly in Lin Yu's ear. Lin Yu nodded slightly, and then several people walked straight forward without resting. After the bespectacled man saw this scene, he could naturally feel some of Lin Yu's anger. So at this time, although the bespectacled man still wanted to complain at first, when he saw Lin Yu after the murderous look on his face, the words that had reached his lips were swallowed back so hard. Lin Yu took 3 steps forward with a few people, and then he felt that there was suddenly an invisible barrier around here. At this time, after seeing this invisible barrier, Lin Yu's expression became a little ugly. Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. He half closed his eyes, and then gently rubbed his chin. No, there seems to be something wrong with this matter. Lin Yu looked around, and then saw a leaf hanging alone on a tree in the distance. When Lin Yu saw the leaf, his whole body suddenly seemed to be frozen in place, and his face began to look slightly ugly. Suyuyan and Yelengshuang had never seen Lin Yu like this before. They just felt that Lin Yu was a little strange at this time, but what exactly was strange, even they couldn't explain. Suyuyan and Yelengshuang walked to Lin Yu's side, and then whispered in Lin Yu's ear. What happened? What did you see? Lin Yu heard it. After the two of them said this, he suddenly came back to his senses. He just took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Alas, one leaf obscures one's vision, and one cannot see Mount Tai. At this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually after finishing speaking, and then followed up with a burst of sword energy, directly cutting off the leaf. Suyuyan and Yelengshuang just thought Lin Yu was a little strange, but they couldn't explain what was strange. But when the leaf was cut off, the leaf drifted in the wind, and finally fell to the ground. At this moment, the invisible barrier in front of them suddenly disappeared. After Suyuyan and Yelengshuang saw this scene, their expressions suddenly became shocked. How is it possible? Just that leaf can form a barrier that can block our progress. This is a bit too unbelievable. Suyuyan and Yelengshuang said softly. At this time, Lin Yu nodded gently, and then rubbed his chin. After he pondered for a moment, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. That's right, a leaf can block the view of the mountain, isn't it? But when they just finished speaking, they suddenly found that the space around them was no longer the previous space. A giant python as black as ink swung its tail wildly towards them and hit them heavily. The giant python was so powerful that a sound of breaking through the air was heard. The space around it even seemed to be split apart in that instant. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 714. The black scales on the giant python's body glowed with luster, and the strong sense of power displayed on the scales made everyone shudder. Lin Yu stood there, stroking his chin gently, and then half closed his eyes. No, there is indeed something wrong with this matter. At this moment, the giant python opened its bloody mouth and suddenly bit Lin Yu. When the bespectacled man saw the giant python speeding toward them, he was stunned to the spot. At this time, everyone just smelled the smell of urine. At this time, Long Linger was closest to the man with glasses, and the smell became more obvious. Long Linger turned her head towards the man with glasses, and just glanced at it. Finally, a bit of disgust flashed across her face. Color. After seeing this scene, the man with glasses certainly knew that he might have lost his composure in front of Long Linger this time. So at this time, the man with glasses took a few steps away from Long Linger. At this time, Lin Yu stood on the same spot. Although the giant python was biting towards him crazily, there was no trace of fear on his face. Lin Yu turned slightly to the side, and then directly avoided the giant python's bite. Immediately afterwards, Lin Yu kicked back, and with just one kick, the sentence was completely knocked away. The giant python was kicked hard behind him, and a sound of breaking through the air suddenly sounded, and then the giant python hit the ground so hard. It's just that in that brief moment, the surrounding space even vaguely felt like it was about to be split. For some reason, Ye Lengshuang suddenly felt that the aura of the giant python was somewhat attracted to her. A bit of complexity flashed across Ye Lengshuang's eyes, and then she turned her head towards Lin Yu. Take a look. This giant python seems a little strange. The blood in my body seems to have some resonance with this giant python. At this time, Lin Yu looked around and found that the laws of time and space here were all chaotic. In such a chaotic law of time and space, only the subtle ones who could survive must be extraordinary. Lin Yu suddenly thought that Ye Lengshuang's strange beast seemed to have been killed when it fought against the masked man. In fact, Lin Yu has been thinking about finding a suitable opportunity to find a suitable exotic beast for Ye Lengshuang and Suyiyan. When Lin Yu thought of this, he looked at them up and down, with a faint smile on his lips. In that case, it's a good idea to subdue this big guy first and treat it like a strange beast to you. After Suyiyan heard what Lin Yu said, she slowly raised her head, glanced up and down in Lin Yu's direction, and then looked in Lin Yu's direction with a look of resentment. Take a look. She seems to be more important. It's not like I'm old and frail, and people don't want to pay attention to me at all. Suyiyan said leisurely like this, and then turned around, her eyes fixed on Lin Yu. There was a bit of resentment between mother and son, and the corners of her mouth were even more aroused. A faint wry smile. After Lin Yu heard what Suyiyan said, 3 black lines suddenly appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. At this time, he rolled his eyes at Suyiyan angrily, and then followed up. The editor said in a deep voice. You, don't worry. When the time comes, as long as there is a suitable beast for you, I will help you conquer it. After Suyiyan heard Lin Yu say this, she nodded with reluctant satisfaction. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he was on the verge of crying for a while. At this time, he was naturally speechless for a while. At this time, Lin Yu slowly raised his head, and then glanced up and down towards the giant void python, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and the corners of his eyes and eyebrows appeared. There is quite a bit of playfulness in it. After seeing this scene, the void python didn't know why, but there was always a hint of panic in his heart. The void python made a hissing sound in its mouth, and then its body continued to move like this. Heading towards the back, retreating so crazily. The giant void python looked at Lin Yu with a look of horror in its eyes. At this time, Lin Yu was moving towards the giant void python step by step, gradually approaching the corner of his mouth, and even a faint smile appeared. "Don't be afraid, don't worry, I won't hurt you, but you must be obedient, do you understand?" Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the giant void python, and then a faint smile appeared on the corners of his mouth, and there was quite a bit of amusement in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this moment, when the giant void python saw Lin Yu like this, the panic on his face was naturally self-evident. The giant void python was desperately retreating towards the back like this, as if it was trying to avoid Lin Yu. After Lin Yu saw this scene, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and then he snorted coldly. "Little guy, don't blame me for not giving you a chance just now. I've given you a chance, but you didn't help it just now, so don't blame me now." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly flew forward, and then the next second he came to the front of the void python, and then Lin Yu formed seals with his hands, and a lingering breath was wrapped around the void python. However, it was only a moment, and the gloomy breath instantly made everyone's mind tremble gradually. That monstrous breath instantly enveloped the void python. After the void python felt the breath that was wrapped by Lin Yu, a bit of fear suddenly emerged in his expression, and then he subconsciously flew back, trying desperately to avoid Lin Yu's attack. At this moment, Lin Yu's face turned cold, and then he suddenly flew forward. In just a moment, he arrived in front of the giant python. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 715. At this time, Lin Yu just snorted coldly, and then spoke in a deep voice. "Now you'd better not resist, so as not to suffer the physical pain." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he directly summoned the space-time beast and the holy fire unicorn. After the space-time beast and the fire unicorn appeared, the pressure from the bloodline pressed on the void python. After seeing the giant void python at this time, the space-time beast's expression actually showed a bit of joy, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of its mouth. "It's interesting. It's really interesting. I didn't expect to meet my juniors here." Lin Yu never expected that this giant void python was actually the descendant of this space-time beast. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly remembered that the identity of this space-time beast was extremely unique. Lin Yu could be considered to be well-read, but there was no record of this space-time beast. Moreover, there really shouldn't be no record of a beast with such heaven-defying power like the time and space beast. After Lin Yu thought of this, he couldn't help but half squinted his eyes, and then looked up and down at the space-time beast. After seeing Lin Yu's eyes at this time, the space-time beast couldn't help but condense. Then, as if it had some ominous premonition, it subconsciously took a few steps back. He looked at Lin Yu warily, with a bit more complexity in his expression. "You, what do you want to do? I'm warning you, you'd better not mess around, otherwise. At this time, the space-time beast's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, and then he spoke softly, with a bit of indifference in his expression. At this time, when Lin Yu saw the time and space beast like this, he rolled his eyes, and then glared at the time and space beast in an unhappy manner, and then said softly. "Look what you said, how could I do anything to you? I'm just thinking about how to win over your junior, so that I can reunite with you." At this time, Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the time and space beast immediately understood Lin Yu's intention, so at this time she couldn't help but turn her head and stared at Lin Yu. Yu looked up and down, his expression showing a bit of indifference. "Don't think that I don't know what kind of medicine you are selling in this gourd, or what kind of calculation you are making now. Although that junior can be suppressed by my bloodline, but..." At that time, the space beast paused immediately after saying this, with a faint bitter smile on the corner of his mouth, a hint of helplessness in his expression, and a hint of helplessness between his eyebrows. You really give me a headache." The time and space beast involved in this incident had a hint of helplessness between its brows, a somewhat indifferent bitter smile on its lips, and a hint of indifference in its expression. Lin Yu heard the time and space beast. After saying this, he turned his head. After looking up and down at the time and space beast, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. After all, he is a descendant of your own family. You have to think clearly. If there is a conflict by then, I'm afraid you won't have to do it yourself. Now if there is a chance to defeat others without fighting, aren't you considering using it now? At this time, Lin Yu's eyes were looking up and down at the space-time beast, and he even evoked a faint smile, and there was a hint of amusement in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, the space beast also knew what Lin Yu was thinking at this time, so it was so beautiful at the time. It looked at Lin Yu up and down, and finally coughed lightly, and then spoke like this. He said hesitantly. Ahem, you, I'm afraid your words are a bit. Lin Yu also turned his head at this time, looked at the space-time beast viciously, and then whispered helplessly. Anyway, the choice is yours now. If you want to take action, then I have no objection. After all, as an ancestor, I can't do such a thing if you ask me to do something to one of my descendants. What a beast! Lin Yu spoke softly at this time, with a leisurely smile on the corner of his mouth and a bit of playfulness in his eyes. Then he looked at the space-time beast with a smile on his face, and there was a lot of expression in his expression. A bit of indifference. After the space-time beast heard what Lin Yu said, he couldn't help but clenched his fists, then gritted his teeth, and then spoke softly. Okay, I'll go and suppress him myself. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast couldn't help but have 3 black lines appear on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. However, he was empty-handed at this time, and he didn't know what he should say. Just fine, he appeared in the void in the next second, but it was only a matter of exhalation and inhalation, and in just a brief moment, he had already arrived in the sky of the rising sun. At this time, the space-time beast just glanced up and down at the void python, and then the indifferent pressure on his body was released without reservation. After the void python saw the space-time beast at this time, the whole person's expression was also shocked, with a completely gentlemanly look between his eyebrows, an unbelievable look, and his eyes looking at the space-time beast were full of disbelief. How is it possible? At this time, the space-time beast just kissed his throat gently, and then stared at the space-time beast condescendingly, with a little more indifference in his expression, and then he couldn't help but shake his head slightly. Alas, it's hard to say, let's not talk about Pang's affairs for now. Today I will ask you if you are willing to submit to my master. If you are willing, then there is no need to say more about other things. If you are not willing, I am afraid you really have to suffer some hardships. At this time, the space-time beast said in a leisurely and cold voice. At this moment, the giant space-time python's expression froze. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 716. Ancestor, how can you be like this? Don't you care about the love of blood? At this time, the space-time beast and the void python were standing opposite each other, looking at each other. Immediately afterwards, the space-time beast snorted coldly. Do you think that I did all this willingly? Don't you think about it yourself? With your current strength, even if I don't deal with you, there are too many strange beasts that the master can deal with you. So listen to my advice and just surrender, that's your best choice. The space-time beast almost said this through gritted teeth, then glanced up and down at the giant void python, and then said this leisurely. At this time, the giant void python just snorted coldly, and then waved his hand casually the next second, looking down at the space beast, and then the resolute and decisive killing intention in his body appeared in it. At this time, it was released without reservation. I have no control over Pang's affairs, and I don't want to, but if you say things like this, there is absolutely no way I will agree to you. Don't even think about it, I said so. At this time, the void python was almost gritting his teeth as he spoke. The determination in his body began to become more and more obvious at this moment. I don't know why this void python was able to ignore the pressure of blood. At this moment, after seeing this scene, the space beast glanced helplessly at Lin Yu, and then said leisurely, "The way this little guy looks now, I'm afraid it's a bit difficult to deal with, and I don't know what to do now. I just feel a little headache, that's all." At that time, the space beast said helplessly. Of course, Lin Yu also knew the difficulty of the space-time beast, so at this moment, he had a thought in his mind, and then immediately summoned the holy fire Kylin and the red and yellow sand beast. At the beginning, the giant void python may not have realized the terror and horror of Lin Yu, but when he saw the red sand beast and the holy fire unicorn, his whole expression began to change. It seemed to be frozen. At this time, the void python looked at Lin Yu as if he were looking at a monster. There was a look of disbelief in the corners of his eyes and brows. He simply couldn't believe what he was seeing. It's actually true. Lin Yu just waved his hand, and then a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. There was a bit of indifference in his expression, and the next second he stepped forward. "Step. I will give you a chance today. Now surrender to me obediently, and I can spare your life. Otherwise, you will definitely die today, and no one I tell you can save you." At this time, Lin Yu was almost speaking like this through gritted teeth. The killing and decisive aura in his body was condensed in his brother and released in Chen at that moment. At this moment, Lin Yu had a somewhat indifferent look in his eyes, and he looked so condescending. After seeing this scene, the red-trained yellow sand beast looked at Lin Yu with eyes full of admiration. At this moment, after the giant void python felt the elusive aura of awe in Lin Yu, his face began to turn slightly pale, and his expression became slightly ugly. The giant void python looked towards Lin Yu, just looked up and down, and then took a deep breath. You. At this time, Lin Yu just took a step forward, and then a trace of murderous aura was released completely at that moment. But in just a moment, the surging killing intent was released without reservation. Under that surging killing intent, everyone's expressions began to look slightly frightened. Lin Yu just took a few steps forward gently, and then he pinned the giant void python with a smile on his face, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. How? If you think about it carefully now, you may still have a chance of survival. If you really piss me off, then you will have no chance at all. Lin Yu just spoke in a leisurely and unhurried manner, with a hint of indifference in his deep affection, which forced the giant void python to take a few steps back. At the end, the giant void python gritted his teeth as if he had made up his mind. He glanced at Lin Yu, and then clenched his fists. You. Lin Yu just rubbed his chin gently, and then smiled slightly, with a bit of indifference in his expression. What am I? In the end, the giant void python also felt helpless for a while, and then a hint of helplessness flashed across his expression, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Okay, I promise you this will be okay. The giant void python seemed to have been drained of all its strength at this time, and it spoke so feebly. After all, as a strange beast of this level, it naturally has its own pride, but now Lin Yu is forcefully having trampled this pride under his own feet. The void python was naturally a little reluctant. Lin Yu heard the void python. After saying this, there was only a slight smile on the corner of his mouth, and a trace of amusement flashed across the corners of his eyes and brows. How? Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly. The giant void python heard Lin Yu, and after saying this, he just turned his head and looked at Lin Yu up and down, with a bit of indifference in his expression. "What do you want me to do? Just tell me. Since I have agreed to you, I will naturally agree to you. I have nothing to say. I am willing to let you decide everything." The entire momentum of the giant void python suddenly became sluggish at this moment, and then it said helplessly, with a bit of indifference in its expression. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu quickly turned his head and glanced at Ye Lengshuang. "Anyway, you have seen the situation now. See for yourself what decision you should make." Lin Yu just had this look on his face, staring at Ye Lengshuang with a smile, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 717. At this time, Lin Yu's expression made them condensed, and then he showed a bit of indifference. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and his face seemed to have a little more color. Very interesting. And at this moment, the space beast seemed to want to remember something. Remember not to resist. This may be a blessing for you. Don't think about taking the opportunity to fight back. That will only make you ask for trouble. Whether you believe it or not, I have already warned you. You. The space-time beast just said so indifferently, and then looked at the guy up and down. Naturally, the giant void python did not dare to make any mistakes. At this time, Zhuge Yanru and the man in black were walking slowly towards the cave. At first, Zhuge Yanru had a good idea, but it was just an ambush. But Zhuge Yanru, after thinking for a moment, gritted his teeth again, and then decided to go in first and get this thing, and we would talk about the rest later. When Zhuge Yanru thought of this, he slowly walked inside. His speed was not slow. He walked towards the front. After a while, he instantly felt the power of the Titan Python. A bloody pressure. At this time, Zhuge Yanru and the man in black felt that their chests were being pressed by a huge boulder, making them unable to breathe at all. The man in black robe turned his head towards Zhuge Yanru and just glanced at him. "Lord Qi, what should we do now?" The black-robed man's eyes were fixed directly on Zhuge Yanru, and even his voice was slightly hoarse at this moment, and his face was a little pale. Zhuge Yanru's expression couldn't help but condense, and then he took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. This is indeed a problem. As for the problems in this, we will talk about it when the time comes. There are some things that I can't explain clearly. Zhuge Yanru said indifferently, and some of his aura was slightly revealed at this moment. After Zhuge Yanru's aura was revealed, the pressure of the Titan Python was not so obvious to the two of them. After seeing this scene, the time and space beast couldn't help but heaved a sigh of relief. At this time, he let out a long sigh of relief, and his expression was a little more joyful. And just after this moment, a violent force invaded everyone's chest in an instant. That surging force made everyone's hearts tremble. A surge of murderous intent began to be released so quietly. That bloody murderous intent made everyone's hearts freeze. An outsider actually dares to unleash his pressure in front of me. Could it be that you are impatient? At this time, the pressure of the Titan Python was released without reservation. A surge of power instantly made everyone feel as if a huge boulder was pressing down on their hearts. The Titan Python almost said this through gritted teeth, and the killing aura in his body was displayed without reservation almost in an instant. At this moment, after Zhuge Yanru saw this scene, a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and his expression showed a bit of indifference, and then he couldn't help but half squinted his eyes. "Why don't I dare to release my pressure in front of you? It's really interesting. Who do you think you are?" At this time, Zhuge Yanru said coldly, and then he turned around and glanced at the man in black robe beside him. The man in black robe understood what Zhuge Yanru meant. Without saying a word, just a thought in his mind, and then the next second, he flashed forward. The speed of the man in black robe was extremely fast, but in just one breath, he had already reached the deepest part of the cave. When the two of them reached the deepest part of the cave, they saw a huge piece of the stone wall. That huge stone wall in the cave has a snake head embedded in the stone wall. After seeing this scene, Hippeo and Duguyanru felt their hearts sinking at first. After a moment, they felt happy. Their eyes were fixed on the Titan Python, with expressions on their faces. There is a bit of indifference in it. Ha ha ha, I knew it, I knew you would end up in such a mess, ha ha ha. Duguyanru and the black-robed man laughed like this, with a bit of indifference in their expressions, and the smiles at the corners of their mouths became even more obvious. Titanoboa had never been so insulted before, so at this time, the murderous aura in him came out in an instant. A surging murderous intention spread towards Duguyanru and the black-robed man, and then the surrounding boulders suddenly attacked towards them. The surrounding boulders were very fast and extremely powerful, but in just a split second, they came in front of the two of them, as if they would not stop until they were completely killed. Generally, Duguyanru and the black-robed man, after seeing this scene, their faces were suddenly shocked, and then they changed their bodies and retreated rapidly. They retreated several steps to stabilize their bodies. Duguyanru and the black-robed man looked at each other, and then looked at the Titan Python on the stone wall. At this time, the black-robed man and Duguyanru found that there was indeed a medicinal herb on the head of the Titan Python, and that medicinal herb was indeed the God King medicinal herb. This God King medicinal herb exuded a peculiar fragrance, which began to spread quietly in front of them. At this time, Duguyanru and the black-robed man smelled the faint fragrance, and their expressions were also condensed. Duguyanru and the man in black robe looked at each other, and then their faces changed and they began to look a little unnatural. I didn't expect that the God King Yao grass was actually on this guy's head. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 718. At this time, the man in black robe also subconsciously glanced at Duguyanru, and then a faint bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, with a hint of helplessness flashing across his expression. Then, now, according to your opinion, what should we do? At this time, the man in black robe whispered to Duguyanru, with a trace of complexity flashing in his eyes, and a faint bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. At this time, after hearing what the man in black robe said, Duguyanru's expression became a little more indifferent, and his expression could not help but become so cold, with a hint of gloominess in his face. What should I do? How do I know what to do? I have a headache, a terrible headache. At this time, Duguyanru said helplessly, with a faint bitter smile on the corner of his mouth, and a hint of helplessness flashed across his face. The man in black robe was naturally a little unwilling to be scolded for no reason, but now the man in black robe also knew what his situation was. At this time, the man in black robe had a faint bitter smile on his lips, and a hint of helplessness flashed across his face. Then look. After a while, Duguyanru also took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. He half squinted his eyes, and a trace of indifference flashed across his expression. I'll think of a solution, but no matter what, I'm afraid it will depend on the situation. As for what to do then, it depends on the situation. After Duguyanru finished speaking, he slowly turned around, and then walked away quietly. But even after that moment, the Titanoboa seemed to be a little confused about these two people. At this time, the Titan Python's eyes were fixed on them, with a bit of indifference in his expression, and his body showed a surging murderous aura. Duguyanru slowly walked up to the Titan Python. He gently rubbed his chin, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. I think you should also know what I came to see you for today. I advise you to give me the God King herb. Then I may be able to help you remove the seal. Wouldn't it be the best of both worlds? At this time, Duguyanru was talking softly and unhurriedly, and finally there was a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, and a trace of amusement flashed between his eyebrows. At this time, after hearing what Duguyanru said, Titanoboa couldn't help laughing. At this time, Titanoboa looked like it was completely crazy, and its laughter was very harsh. Ha ha ha, the best of both worlds. Are you sure? Don't think I don't know what you are thinking now. At this time, the Titan Python suddenly flew forward, and then released its entire pressure on Duguyanru without any reservation. That surging murderous intent was revealed so crazily in just a moment. That bloody murderous intent made everyone's hearts tremble. At this time, even Hippeo and Duguyanru never expected that this Titan Python could actually use his soul to step forward. But Duguyanru naturally didn't try to be a vegetarian either. Duguyanru just waved his hand, and then the attack from the Titan Python was easily resolved. At this time, the Titan Python did not seem to be determined to kill Duguyanru, so it did not continue to attack. The Titan Python looked towards Duguyanru, looked up and down, and then snorted coldly. Humph, I can still count it. I have some ability, but it's a pity that I'm still a little short of it. I'm so weak. At this time, the expressions on the faces of Titanoboa and Duguyanru began to become a little exciting. Duguyanru was too lazy to talk nonsense to the Titan Python, so at this time, Duguyanru just looked up and down at the Titan Python, and then immediately became so cold. He snorted. Humph, there is no benefit at all if the two of us continue to face each other like this. As long as I can only see the two of us, it is better to stay like this for the time being. As for the future, it is best to discuss it in the long term. What do you think? Titanoboa heard it, and Duguyanru only hesitated for a moment after saying this. It's not that I can't give it to you, but I still have a condition. As long as you agree to this condition, I will naturally agree to it when the time comes. Titanoboa just said in a cold voice in a leisurely manner, and then a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his expression became a little more indifferent. At this time, when Duguyanru heard the Titan Python relenting, his heart could not help but suddenly wash away, and then he nodded heavily. No problem, as long as you are willing to hand over the God King herb to us at this time, and as long as your conditions are not excessive, I can agree to you. What do you think of what I said? Let's talk about your conditions now. The two of them had finally made up their minds. At this time, the Titan Python said in a cold voice. It's very simple. I just want you to release me. As long as you can help me remove the seal of some herbs, I will naturally offer them with both hands. You also saw that the divine herbs are on my head. At this time, the black-robed man and Duguyanru looked at each other, and the black-robed man also secretly sent a message to Duguyanru. This guy is cunning. In my opinion, he must not be trusted. Otherwise, let's take a long-term view, how about it? At this time, the black-robed man's eyes were staring straight at Duguyanru, with a little more complicated meaning in his expression, and a trace of strange color flashed between his eyebrows. At this time, after hearing what the black-robed man said, Duguyanru's expression on his face could not help but condense slightly, and then he just hesitated for a moment. Fortune comes with risk. That little guy is quite powerful, and he has several powerful beasts on him. If he comes, I'm afraid. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 719. When Duguyanru said this, he immediately flew forward, and then in just a breath, he had already arrived in front of a person. He pushed forward and suddenly pushed out a palm. Then, a dark shadow like ink appeared in the dark. At this time, the corner of the man's mouth just raised a faint smile, and then his eyes were fixed on Dugu Yanru, with a playful look between his eyebrows, and a bit of indifference in his expression. Interesting, it's really interesting, so I know that you may have some skills, but I never thought that you can have such skills. This really caught me off guard. At this time, the man's eyes stared at Dugu Yanru, and a strange light flashed in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. Then, a mysterious breath rose up into the sky, and then a long sky, like a bright moon in the sky, was seen. Xiao Ran attacked the inner bones, and instantly forced all the people to retreat. At this time, Dugu Yanru saw the guy in front of him, and his expression was full of disbelief. His eyes were staring at the man in front of him, and then he couldn't help but take a deep breath and calm down his mood. Who are you? Dugu Yanru's eyes were staring at the guy in front of him, and then his expression showed a bit of stern murderous aura, and the cold momentum came out in an instant. At this time, the man just turned his head and looked at Dugu Yanru up and down, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and a bit of viciousness flashed in his expression. Boy, I won't talk about Pang for now. I have something to warn you today. If you dare to release this herb and this Titan Python, I will kill you in the 3 realms of heaven and earth. At this time, the man's eyes were fixed on Dugu Yanru, and a monstrous aura was released without reservation in an instant, and finally Dugu Yanru was even a little breathless. Dugu Yanru took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood a little. There was a bit of indifference in his expression, and a bit of gloom flashed in his eyes. That mysterious power called everyone to rush out to the back in an instant. Then the man took a step forward suddenly, and then his body could not help but retreat so quickly. However, he retreated several steps in a row between one breath and another, and then he barely stabilized his body. Dugu Yanru was just like this, breathing heavily, and his expression began to become slightly flustered, and there was a trace of indifference in his expression, and there was a bit of helplessness between his eyebrows. Who are you? Dugu Yanru's expression at this time flashed a bit of panic, and the pressure from the man forced Dugu Yanru to retreat several steps in a row. Dugu Yanru couldn't help but take a deep breath at that time, and then he calmed down a little bit. At this time, the figure of the black shadow slowly revealed itself, and then appeared in front of Dugu Yanru, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, and a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes when he looked at Dugu Yanru. What do you think? What kind of person do you think I will be? Or what kind of identity do you think I should have now? At this time, the eyes of the figure were fixed on Dugu Yanru, and the indifferent smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and a hint of playful smile flashed in his eyebrows. After hearing what the black shadow said, Dugu Yanru's face sank, and then he could not help but subconsciously move backwards, and after retreating several steps, he barely stabilized his body. Dugu Yanru began to realize that the strength of the guy in front of him was definitely not as simple as he imagined. His face sank slightly, and then he half closed his eyes and gently touched his chin. Who are you? I warn you, I am from the Dark Temple. If you dare to kill me or hurt me, His Majesty the Dark Throne will never let you go. At this time, Dugu Yanru almost gritted his teeth and said this, and then he stepped straight forward. The murderous aura on his body was displayed without reservation at this time, and the bloody killing intention came out in full force. At this moment, after the black shadow heard Dugu Yanru say this, he suddenly smiled, and the playfulness in his eyes and eyebrows became more and more obvious. He slowly moved towards Dugu Yanru, step by step, approaching the cold murderous aura on his body, forcing Dugu Yanru to retreat to the back one after another. Dugu Yanru took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood. You. Dugu Yanru said 3 US in a row, and a hint of gloom flashed across his face. The coldness on his body was like duckweed floating on the autumn water. The fierce momentum forced everyone to step back a few steps, and everyone's mind began to tremble gradually. But just a moment later, The black shadow also smiled suddenly. He just nailed to Dugu Yanru with a smile on his face, and the playful look in his eyes and eyebrows began to become more and more obvious. Boy, don't you think that it is stupid and ridiculous for you to threaten me now? Today I just give you a chance, apologize to me now, otherwise, you will definitely die. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 720. The black shadow slowly moved toward Dugu Yanru, approaching step by step. Then, a slight smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a bit of contempt flashed in his eyes. The look on his face, and the killing intent on his body, began to show up gradually. After waiting for a while, the blood-killing intention in Dugu Yanru was released without reservation. That fierce murderous aura made everyone's hearts freeze. It's just that the black figure seemed to be completely unable to feel the murderous aura on Dugu Yanru's body. He just walked towards Du Yanru step by step, with a faint smile on his lips. Intention, a bit of contempt flashed in his eyes. Boy, let's not talk about other things for now. I just want to ask you today. Are you ready to die? The black figure slowly walked towards Dugu Yanru step by step, with a slight smile on the corner of his mouth. At this time, after Dugu Yanru saw the black figure in front of him, the expression on his face began to become slightly ugly, and there was a bit of indifference in his expression, and then he couldn't help but take a deep breath. And then he calmed down his mood slightly. What do you want to do? I'm warning you, if you dare to mess around, I will definitely not let you go. At this time, after the black figure heard what Dugu Yanru said, a strange light flashed in his expression, and then he couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. You are just afraid, but the fear in this is also very simple, just because you are afraid. Now it is difficult for you to overcome the fear in your own heart, so you are so afraid of me now, I said right or wrong. At this time, the black shadow spoke quietly to Dugu Yanru in a leisurely manner, with a slight smile on the corner of his mouth, and a trace of contempt flashed across his face. After Dugu Yanru heard what the black figure said, his face instantly turned ugly, and then he took a step forward quietly, and then came directly in front of the black figure. Dugu Yanru's eyes widened angrily, staring at the black figure in front of him, with a hint of murderous intent flashing across his expression, and a gloomy look in his eyes. Even the black shadow couldn't help but be moved by that bloody murderous aura. After the black figure felt the murderous aura on Dugu Yanru, he just shook his head casually, and a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Interesting, you little guy is really interesting. I have never felt that you can possess such pure murderous aura. The black figure had a completely condescending attitude, which made Dugu Yanru feel a little bit speechless after feeling the contempt in the black figure's heart at this moment. Dugu Yanru glanced at the Titan python in the distance, and finally looked up and down at the black shadow here. At this time, Dugu Yanru couldn't help but take a deep breath. Tone. Tell me, I just want to know why you came here this time. Don't tell me, it's just to prevent me from lifting this big guy's seal, even if you say so, I won't believe it either. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Dugu Yanru's mouth, a hint of indifference flashed across his expression, and a hint of contempt flashed across his face. At this time, the black shadow gradually revealed its figure. When Dugu Yanru saw the black shadow, he was shocked and dumbfounded. Dugu Yanru's eyes were fixed on the black figure, with a somewhat complicated expression flashing across his face. I didn't expect you to be a member of that clan. How is this possible? At this time, Dugu Yanru's voice even trembled slightly, and his eyes looking at the black figure were full of disbelief. He couldn't believe his eyes at all. At this moment, Dugu Yanru took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. After the black figure heard what Dugu Yanru said, he just glanced up and down in Dugu Yanru's direction, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. What? Is it weird that I am a member of that clan? Maybe you would think so, but I don't. At this time, the black shadow was slowly approaching Dugu Yanru step by step, with a faint smile on the corners of his mouth, and a hint of contempt in his expression. And Dugu Yanru looked at the black-robed man with an unbelievable look in his eyes. He just took a sudden step forward, and then he came to the black figure in one step. Before. Stop talking nonsense, your purpose of finding me this time is not that simple. Now there is no need to hide anything between the two of us. Wouldn't it be the best thing to just open the skylight and speak openly? Dugu Yanru said coldly. At this moment, after hearing what Dugu Yanru said, the black shadow just shook his head slightly, and then fixed it on Dugu Yanru with a smile on his face, and there was quite a bit of emotion in his eyes. Of playfulness. But for now, I have an absolute advantage and full right to speak, so judging from the current situation, you don't seem to have any qualifications to talk to me about this. The black shadow slowly walked towards Dugu Yanru step by step, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth and a hint of contempt in his expression. At this moment, a sense of oppression arose spontaneously. When Dugu Yanru felt the sense of oppression, for some reason, he suddenly felt an urge to surrender to that person. At this time, Dugu Yanru was really panicked. His eyes were fixed on the black figure, and his affectionate look was full of disbelief. How is it possible? How could I feel a little familiar with the aura on your body? What is going on? Dugu Yanru's eyes widened angrily, and then he clenched his fists.